In today's video, I'm going to be taking the gas tank and carburetor out of this Kawasaki Ninja 250. It's had rust issues ever since I bought it. It sat for 10 years, and I'm just going to be taking it all out and re-cleaning it. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to take out the gas tank and the carburetor on this bike. Alright, so to start, it's really easy. All you need is a Phillips head screwdriver and a 10mm socket. And there's going to be one screw on each side that you unscrew. And I've actually already messed up. First, you're actually going to pop the seat off. Then now that you got the seat off and these screws out, these panels, you pop them out from the rear and then slide down from the top. There's a pin here and another one that pops out from here, just a tab. Then it slides right out. So after unplugging that, just take your 10mm, unscrew the gas tank, I'll just need to grab Allen keys. There will be 2 on each side that are also screwed into the gas tank that keeps the front fascia on the gas tank. So I'll go grab that real quick. All right, now that I've got my 4mm hex, just the 4 screws holding the fascia on. And then I also like to pop these little grommet bits out and washers, mainly just the metal washer end things, because they like to fall out, and I'd rather take them out and set them somewhere than do that and lose them. I'll get the other side. Alright, so once you get all those screws loose, just turn the petcock valve off. Yep, it was off. And then I've got a rag here, just so you can unplug the fuel line. Just soak all that up. And then once you get the main line unplugged, there's also a vacuum line here on the petcock. Just pull that out too. And then should be all set to take the tank off. Just lift up from the back here. I like to grab it from where the frame goes on the front here. Just lift it up. There you go. All right, so once you get the gas tank off, then there's going to be 2 cables here, the pull and return for the throttle cable. You're just going to want to loosen the top nut, spin it loose enough that you're able to slide the bottom nut out from this little lip, and then you can pull the throttle up and pull the barrel of the cable out. Same for the other one. If you don't want to remove the air filter, I'm just going to be removing this first bracket, or this first clamp for the intake into the engine. But if you don't want to remove the air box, just unscrew both of these and you can twist the rubber piece and take it out, and then you can slide the carb forward and out. But I've removed the air box so that I can take it out easier. So I'm just gonna undo these. So at the top here, this is the choke lever. When you pull it, it pulls on the choke. All you're gonna do is pull the back of it towards the left side of the bike, slide it over. It's kind of a tight fit. And then once you get it over there, just slides out like that. And then you should be able to take the barrel off. And then once you've got all that done, you should be good to pull the carburetor off. All right, now if you haven't already, I'd recommend putting rags in the intake of your bike just to make sure nothing gets in the valves between now and when you get the carb back on, because they'll be sitting for a little bit while we clean this. And I'll especially be sitting for longer with the gas tank off because we'll have to let that sit for a while. I let it sit for about 4 or 5 days, and it still needs more cleaning. So I'm probably gonna let mine sit for a few weeks, but it really depends on how rusty your tank is. So to start with this, the bowls have screws on the bottom here. They're just Phillip heads. I've had to replace these many times because from factory they are way over tightened. So I'm just going to unscrew all of these. Should be 4 per bowl. And there'll probably be some gas coming out of here, and try and keep things organized so you at least know what screws are for what part. These bowl screws are all the same length, but just to make sure you don't put a wrong screw in the wrong spot. This is also the idle adjustment screw. 2 of the bowl screws are going to be holding that in, so I'd recommend taking those out at the same time, just so you don't try and pull one bowl off and not realize you're also trying to pull part of the other bowl off because of that piece. I had actually bought a replacement carb off Amazon, and it did not come with this piece. I salvaged it from the old carb. But then yeah, then your bowl is removed, and there's still some gas in here, so I'll just soak it up with a rag. Doesn't look too dirty. There is some rust particles in there in the bottom. Yeah, there's some rust in the bottom there, so that's why I'm tearing this all apart. It's just because it's all dirty in there. And I also like to keep, that's what this second rag sort is, I like to keep my stuff organized, so everything for one bowl will go on one side, the other bowl on the other side. If you have more carbs and you're working on a different bike, I'd still do it the same way just to keep things more organized. So if something is going wrong with a specific carb, it's easier to find out which specific carb it is. All right, so once you get your carb apart and you get the bowls off, then these are 8mm. An 8mm socket will get these loose, otherwise I don't tighten them too tight, so just some pliers will do just fine. And then this is going to be our main jet for that carb. And then our other main jet for the first carb. I'm also going to use this at the end of my carbon choke spray to push the pin out for the float. And then in there we've also got the needle. And then there you've got your main jet and bowls and needles out. Now that's going to be most of your issues if you are having fuel system issues, is something being clogged or your floats, either the needle isn't seating because the end of it is beat up and dirty. These ones are practically new. If you do clean anything, always use a carbon choke spray. Normal brake clean will eat through the rubber on the needle. And it possibly could corrode the plastic of the float, but that's less unlikely. But carburetors do not like ethanol. They do not like anything that can eat through rubber because they use a lot of rubber to keep things sealed in that. Like the diaphragm on top might even get damaged from it. So don't run ethanol through a bike. It will just eat through it. But I got these carbs apart. If I shine a light through it, let's see if I can set it up so you guys can see. You can see a hole through the middle there. Now these also have holes on the sides there. So that was the main issue I had through the summer, was these, can't tell by the darker color, these are actually the old jets from this bike, and this is the new carburetor. So this carburetor is pretty clean. Now it's dirty because it's got rust in it. But I took the old jets because the new jets were a different size. They didn't have nearly as many holes on the side. And what I found the issue is with the carb, why it wasn't running right, is these little pinholes. I had to take a tack and just run, or actually I think it was a little piece of wire brush. I just ran it through there and cleaned it out a little. And that was causing so many fuel issues for so long with the bike. So if you're running into issues where it's lean then rich, lean then rich, and you can't get it to run right, double check the sides of the jet, not just the main hole of the jet. But once you've got it all apart, then this is the main bowl. I've got a flathead screwdriver here, and you can unscrew these screws. Now, here's where I don't know a lot of the rest of these parts, what they all do in specific. I'm not very familiar with carburetors. I've just torn this one apart a lot. But this also has a little hole in it, so just make sure that's clear. Basically anything with holes or lines running through it, just clean it out. And then if you grab your carbon choke spray, I like to run it through the entire fuel system. So this is the fuel inlet into the carb. It should just spray out of these two holes. So if I do that, it does. So yeah, just making sure those are clear. Just gonna spray some of this down, get some of that rust out of there. It's floating in the bowl. And yeah, as long as you've got carbon choke spray, you don't really have to worry about it eating through anything, because it'll knock a lot of stuff off without eating through the rubber. I then also like to, if any of these jets are clogged, like these little ones or your main jet, shoot from the back. It's easier to push something out the way it came than to force it through and continue its path. So if something does get clogged in there and it's stuck, it's going to be harder to keep pushing it through than just shoot it out the way it came. I also like to, with these jets with the holes on the side, put the choke in there, choke spray, and then clog the end. And here you should see it'll spray out the little side holes. I'm also gonna clean off these little needles, make sure the tips of them are nice and clean. The rest doesn't really matter as long as it functions, but the tip is what's gonna seal when the float raises, it's gonna seal this so it doesn't flood the carburetor. I'm gonna do the same for the other side. Now this is my janky setup of my bike's not running right and I need to drive 15 miles home. Where if I would just go hard on the throttle, it'd burn up all the extra gas. So I think this is closed. And just double check. I'm actually going to take these, I think from factory, these are Allen bolts. Well, this one's like insanely tight. With this carb, they are now, yeah, that was like corroded or something. These are now Phillips, so they're a lot easier to deal with. Maybe they're flatheads, I don't remember. Yeah. So then this is what's gonna be what plugs your bowl, to make sure it seals. I'd clean this off too, the end of it, so it seals, and then also your threads if they're having issues like mine were. and just like rub it off the rag or something. Then down here, you can also just spray out some more of that rust. And then once you can visually see it's clean, that should be 90% of your problems. You don't need to take it to an ultrasonic cleaner and have it like deep clean unless you're building a race bike. But if you can get what you can see out, it should run just fine. Yeah, there we go. Now I got it loose. Now I'm not going to these ones, but the seals on them. This is already a newer carb, so these ones are good. But if your carb's old or you can see that they are cracking in the seal, I'd recommend getting a rebuild kit. Most of the time they come with all those seals that your carburetor would have, including the top end. I'm not going to be diving into that today just because it works fine, and the bottom end is what's going to run into rust. But sometimes they come with new jets depending on the kit. They'll come normally with new floats and needles. And it basically everything you'd be diving into today, possibly some more. So I'm gonna start putting this all back together then. This thing ran impressively for how much rust has been in the system. So once you get your bowls back on, I've got this screwdriver, and down here are gonna be the tuning screws for factory. They're actually gonna have aluminum caps. I took them out on the old carb. This is a newer carb, so it from factory doesn't come with them. But if it's the first time your carb has been taken off your bike like this one was, I recommend drilling a little hole in the center of the cap and then putting like a little bolt or self-tapping screw, screwing it in a little bit, just enough so that you can grab it with some pliers and pull it out with the cap. That way you can get access to these screws. I'd count your turns, twist them in. So that's gonna be half, 1, half, 2, and there we go. So these were turned 2 turns out. I think Kawasaki would go like 1 7/8, 1 3/4 to 2, somewhere in that range. And the guy actually watched on YouTube to figure out how to take these carbs apart. He actually recommends 2.5. So I'm gonna unscrew these. I'm just gonna set it back to the 2 it was at, just so it's easier, and then later we can retune them when the bike's running and warmed up. So once you get it loose, don't pull it out just yet. Tilt it upside down to pull it out, and it'll come with a spring too. There should also, I think, be a washer and a rubber piece. I'm missing them for this carb. I was driving home one day. This bike has been nothing but problems, but driving home, one of the screws fell out because it was too loose trying to get it to run right, and the idle screw fell out. I had to take one from the other bike. I'd also recommend keeping these separated too, just from each side of the carb. When these get dirty, it's just this little tip here. So just clean the tip of that. You can clean the whole thing, would probably be better too. But the tip is actually what's gonna tune and allow fuel into the air mixture. So just make sure that little needle's clean so you can accurately tune it. I'm also gonna shoot some carb clean down these holes just to make sure they're also clean. Be careful because they are very fine point. Don't bend them. And with these, you especially want to be careful not to tighten them too much, but you want to screw it in as much as you can. So all the way till it bottoms out. But when it bottoms out, just be gentle. Now it's compressing the spring. If I keep going, there, it's stopping. Don't crank on it. or else you will score or bend this needle end, and then you can't tune it. I've heard many stories of people running into that issue where they can't tune their bike or four-wheeler, or something's wrong and they can't figure it out because they broke the needle. These two are at different angles. So this one is kind of pointed this way, and then this one's pointed that way. You don't want to twist them so that they're both pointing the same direction. You want to twist them the same amount. So this I'm going to twist 2 turns. So right now it's pointed like up and down in line with the carb. I'm going to back it out 1 turn, 2 turns. So this is still pointed that way, and this one's still pointed that way. You don't want them both pointing the same way unless they already stop that way. But this way they're backed out the same amount. Now that you've got those in, if you've got one of these, it's pretty nice. Then I'd recommend putting it in and finishing cleaning the bowls or screwing the bowls in. I just didn't want it in because it's easier to adjust this with this kind of more out of the way. All right, so now you've got a clean carburetor. I'm gonna wrap this in towel and set it on the side of my bench. All right, so instead of moving my gas tank on the bench, this is where I'm gonna have it set for a little bit. But I'm just gonna take the petcock off of the gas tank. These are 2 10mm bolts, or they've also got Phillips ends in them. I'm just gonna unscrew both of them. And take the petcock out. All right, so once you get the petcock out, these are the 2 screws that hold it in. They've got little plastic seals on them, so I'd recommend keeping those. It'll just help make sure this is sealed. This also has a seal here. I'm just gonna take this off. I'm also going to be replacing this. From factory, it did not come with one, but because of the issues I was running into, I decided to run one. This would have just been a straight line to the inlet of the carb, but I decided to cut it up and put a fuel filter in between. But I'm also just going to be taking apart this petcock. So off obviously seals it. On uses this pickup up here. So with the gas tank, it'll be filled up to about here. As it drains down, your bike might die if it goes down and isn't picking up any here. So anymore here, so you can switch it to reserve, where the pickup is down here now, and you've got a little bit more gas to get to a gas station or somewhere. So that's definitely handy. These did have filters on top. But I couldn't find the correct replacement for it or the correct replacement petcock, so I just decided to run it unfiltered, and any particles would just be collected by this filter. So that's why I'm now running a filter, and from factory it doesn't, because the petcock originally comes with these and mine were torn. Getting into the valve, I'm just going to switch it on so it's out of the way of the screw. There's going to be 2 screws on the top here, and you're just going to want to unscrew those. And these are little baby screws, so try not to lose them. And then this front plate will come off. This holds this switch in and kind of just tells you which position you're on for the fuel. And then this is your petcock switch. I just wiggle it and pull it out. There you go. And as you can see in here, the reason I'm also going through here is there is a bunch of buildup in there. There's also this little spring washer thing here on the front. And then there's an O-ring here on the outside that seals it. I've already replaced it, so I'm just gonna leave it. But if it's the first time you've gone through the petcock, either since buying the bike or in a long time, I definitely recommend replacing it, just to avoid fuel leaks. But otherwise, I'm just gonna spray this down with some carb clean. This is a lot easier cleaning than varnish, I'll tell you that much. That's looking pretty clean. This is actually just a seal. So you can take that out to clean it. And then here you can see the rest of how that works. So this, I'm gonna try spraying off some. All right, and that's looking a lot cleaner already. I'm gonna clean this out. This pickup, this hole is actually for this pickup, and this other hole is for the shorter one. So if you run carb clean down the hole, you can see not only the rust coming out, but that it uses that hole, and this one is cleaner and uses the other one. So, and then the back is just gonna be Phillips head screws. And then once you get these 5 screws out, this back plate will come off. Be gentle with it. Because in here, there's gonna be this metal backing plate. There will also be a like rubber gasket, and then plastic. Let's see if I can get it off. There we go. But then there's gonna be another rubber gasket with plastic and this diaphragm. I just dropped the screw, not excuse the spring. And then there's this little spring here too. I'm just gonna rub more carb clean through it, through this hole, down this hole, and then probably some through this vacuum line too, just to make sure. All right, so once you get everything clean, I start from the back, being it's more difficult. On this diaphragm, little pins on it, you can see that you have to line up little holes in this rubber. You can then set it back in. Then you want to make sure you put the spring on the back side of the diaphragm and then put this cover on. Make sure it's lined up, make sure everything seals, and then you're going to want to keep pressure on there until you get, I'd say, at least 2 screws fully seated down. I like to do them diagonally just for even pressure. All right, and there we go. They're all seated in there. I'll just double check and make sure they're all tight. I'm then gonna put this back in. It doesn't really matter how it goes in. It's just a seal between all of these. But as long as you get it lined up with the holes right, it should sit in nicely. And then making sure everything's still clean, you can put this valve back in. I'm gonna put it in the on position. So I found if the O-ring's catching on this edge and trying to push itself out, just gently twist it back and forth and watch all the sides, and then it should wiggle itself back in. I'm then also gonna put this little spring piece back on. This kind of just keeps tension on it to keep this in better. Then I'm gonna put the cover back on to hold the switch in place, and then without losing these itty bitty screws, put these back in. And then twist it just to make sure that's off, on, reserve. You should be all good. So I've got my gas tank here. I'm gonna pop the lid open. You can see in there, it is kind of clean. There's obviously some rust around the edge here, but with a closer look, you can see a little speck there. Before you put your vinegar in, what you're gonna wanna do is on the other side, where your petcock valve was, you're gonna wanna find some way to clog this. Now, this is a very temporary solution, but as long as it doesn't flood out right away, you should be all set. And I like to stick it over something, so in case it leaks, it shouldn't make too big of a mess. Now what I've got here is, these are jugs of distilled white vinegar, and when you pour it in, this will act as a rust eater. These are about $4 a gallon instead of $30 a gallon, so I find them to be much better. So I'm just gonna pour all 4 jugs of this in there, and we should be set. I've got the vinegar sitting in the tank here. I'm gonna let that sit for probably about a week or two. Most of it's cleaned out already from the first time I did it, but I'm gonna do it again just because there is some more debris. There might be some in the top here, so I'm gonna flip it upside down too. That should get all of the rust cleaned out and we should be all set to go with that. And then I will put it all back on the bike. I've got the carb and petcock cleaned it already. I'm gonna get a new fuel filter, and then I can throw all that on the bike and the tank last. But being that's gonna sit for a week, I'm just gonna upload this video as is, and I'll post another one of putting it all back together, with it all clean, possibly starting it and tuning it. It is middle of winter, so I won't be riding it, but it'd be nice to at least get it running right. Probably the best it's ran in over a decade. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good day.